Off the southeastern coast of the United States lies a stretch of sea with an evil reputation. Many have perished in these deceptively calm waters. Planes vanish without trace. Boats disappear into oblivion. Investigators have struggled to explain the secrets of this place. They've blamed giant sea monsters, magnetic anomalies, gas eruptions from the ocean floor, even UFO abductions. Some say that this is the most dangerous area of sea in the world. They call it the Bermuda Triangle. It was a hot July afternoon in 1997. The Royal Navy frigate HMS London was about to stumble across the latest mystery of the Bermuda Triangle.
We were on transit from exercise off Newfoundland down towards the West Indies, and we just got out into the warm weather, and it being a Saturday afternoon just after 4 o'clock, we decided to allow the hands a chance to swim, and we were slowing down to let that happen.
In London's operations room, an alert radar operator spotted a faint contact on his screen.
When you get a small radar contact like that, there are a number of possible issues. Fishing buoys, weather buoys. Occasionally you get refrigerators and containers that have washed off ships.
Yes, sir, new contact, no, bearing 195, 8 nautical miles. Appears at station power plots, has CPA of 1 cable, bearing...
But this contact was a small yacht.
It's a very intermittent contact, sir.
Yep.
Drifting aimlessly some 600 miles from land.
She's got no sails up, sir.
Commander Greenlees' officer of the watch was Lieutenant Doug Delina, on exchange from the United States Navy.
It wasn't moving. There were no sails up, and there were lines hanging over the sides. The sails were all furled and battened, and the main boom was broken. At that point, the captain told me that we needed to take a look at it much more closely.
Let's see if we can raise anyone. Sound 2 short blasts, please.
Aye, sir. Sound 2 short blasts.
Sound 2 short blasts.
The response was silence. HMS London dispatched her seaboat. The boarding party feared what they might find on the yacht. Wallowing in the Atlantic swell, the boat had obviously been weathered by the wind and the waves. There was no sign of anyone on deck. Below, time had stood still. A notebook revealed that the yacht, the Ruth, was owned by a German couple. The last entry was dated July 1996. Had the boat been drifting for a whole year? What had happened to the crew? No one knew the answer.
It was really quite strange, quite eerie. It just seemed like someone had got up and left and walked out unexpectedly and hadn't returned.
Commander Greenlees decided to salvage the Ruth to Puerto Rico, some 600 miles away through the heart of the Bermuda Triangle. On the 12th of July, the yacht arrived in San Juan. But although the Ruth was saved, her original crew remained missing. Had they drowned at sea? No bodies had been found. newspapers trumpeted yet another mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. It would be some time before the real story of the Ruth could be revealed. The Ruth had been found adrift on the eastern edge of the Bermuda Triangle, an area roughly drawn between Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and Miami. The abandoned yacht was the most recent of a long line of mysteries. Here, ships and planes are said to disappear completely. No wreckage or survivors are ever found. The film The Devil's Triangle tells the story of the most famous mystery of all, the disappearance of Flight 19. On the afternoon of December the 5th, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy Avengers took off from their Florida base on a routine training flight.
It was 2 o'clock when squadron leader Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor felt the ground give way beneath his plane.
The film, narrated by Vincent Price, suggests that the pilots of Flight 19 were about to encounter something very strange.
Fort Lauderdale Tower received radio contact from the 5 planes 15 minutes before they were due to land. But they did not request landing instructions as expected.
We seem to be off course. We cannot see land. Repeat, we cannot see land. We're not sure of our position. We seem to be lost. We don't know which way is west. Everything is wrong. Strange. We can't be sure of any direction. It looks like we are...
Flight 19 was never seen again. So what exactly happened on that December afternoon in the Bermuda Triangle? Fort Lauderdale, Florida. These decaying buildings will soon be demolished, but once they were home to the trainee pilots of Flight 19. Here they received their final training before being sent on assignment. In 1945, David White was a flight instructor at the Naval Air Station.
We did night and day navigation and flying, all of it supposedly dead reckoning. We had no land references at all, so dead reckoning was really just flying by the compass, airspeed, and altitude that you were at, and the plotting board.
Lieutenant Charles Taylor was Flight 19's instructor on December the 5th. Though an experienced pilot, he'd only been in Fort Lauderdale for 2 weeks. He was more familiar navigating south of Miami. At 2:10 p.m., Taylor led his trainees off on their exercise. He was scheduled to fly east towards the Bahamas, then north, then southwest, and back to base. Taylor would have let one of his students take the lead with the rest of the flight flying in close formation. The first sign of a problem came at 3:40 p.m., when another training flight led by Lieutenant Robert Cox overheard a radio transmission.
I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn.
Cox radioed to ask what the problem was.
Now, both my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it's broken. I'm sure I'm in the Keys, but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get to Fort Lauderdale.
Back at base, Flight 19's transmissions were now beginning to cause concern.
I could tell by the tremor in his voice that he was scared, and that's the first thing that alerted me that he had something wrong. I knew that he was in trouble, so he just didn't know where he was.
In December 1945, Melvin Baker was a radio man based at Port Everglades near Fort Lauderdale. This is the first time Baker has spoken on camera about what happened that day. He feels that the tragedy of Flight 19 could have been averted. As Baker listened to the flight's urgent transmissions, he realized that something just didn't add up. Taylor had said that he was over the Florida Keys in the Gulf of Mexico.
If he'd been over the Gulf of Mexico, I wouldn't have heard him as as clearly, and he wouldn't have heard me as clearly when I tried to talk to him.
Was Taylor really over the Florida Keys as he thought? Baker began to doubt it. Perhaps Flight 19 was not so far off course after all. From the air, the Bahamas looked very similar to the Keys. Time was running out. How could Baker test his theory? Baker encouraged Taylor to fly west. He gradually turned down the power output on his own transmitter. If Flight 19 could still hear him, they must be getting nearer. Baker now firmly believed that he was leading Taylor home to safety. But Taylor was so convinced that he was in the Gulf of Mexico that he refused to trust Baker's expertise. He turned to head off in the opposite direction.
They are heading to 030 for 45 minutes. Then we will fly north to make sure we are not over the Gulf of Mexico.
To this day, Melvin Baker regrets that he did not have the authority to order Flight 19 to keep flying west.
I wasn't allowed to give that order. Just being an enlisted man, I couldn't tell a pilot what to do, even though we had jurisdiction over the sector of the ocean.
Taylor's frequent changes of direction were a sign that he was confused. Flight 19 would soon run out of fuel and have to ditch in mid-ocean. The situation was becoming critical. What was desperately needed was a fix on their real position. At 6 p.m., a series of stations finally obtained an approximate fix on Flight 19. Melvin Baker had been right all along. The planes were north of the Bahamas, nowhere near the Florida Keys.
FT-28, this is Port Everglades. Do you read me? FT-28...
By now, the 5 planes were out of contact, their signals drowned by music from Cuban radio stations. But the radio fix meant that rescuers knew roughly where to search. 2 Martin Mariner flying boats were immediately launched to seek the missing squadron. But now the mystery deepened. One of the mariners disappeared, apparently into thin air. A massive search was launched. Over 200 planes scoured the area, but no trace of Flight 19 or the missing mariner was found. Since the 1960s, many writers have investigated the Bermuda Triangle. Some have implied that there are strange forces in this area that could affect ships and planes.
We may find it has something to do with the actual construction of the Earth, with the construction of the sea, with the magnetic powers that exist within the Earth that we suspect, but we don't know if they can be directed or why they are directed.
Could magnetic forces have affected Flight 19? Researcher Larry Cush has painstakingly pieced together the contemporary evidence. The Navy's 1946 Board of Investigation concluded that Taylor got lost because he trusted his instincts more than his instruments.
The reason he thought he was in the Florida Keys is that he had been flying out of Miami for a number of months, and so he was mentally still thinking he was in the Florida Keys. If a pilot or anybody navigating is lost, you can depend on them saying that their compass is broken, because if they see something that disagrees with what they know or feel, they disbelieve the compass. There were several supposed messages about we're entering white water, nothing looks as it should, the sea looks strange. I've talked to the people who were in the tower at the time. I've thoroughly gone through the Navy investigation of people who testified. Nowhere does anybody say that they said any such thing.
So how could Flight 19 have disappeared without leaving any trace? Most writers suggest that they vanished in mid-afternoon in good weather, ideal conditions for a rescue. The last message from the Flight 19 Avengers was received at 7:04 p.m.
That night would have been extremely rough because the winds had picked up to maybe 25 to 30 knots. The waves probably would have been 10 to 12 feet. And to land an airplane like the TBM, which is not that big, is a real tough job.
If you hit a wave, you'd be like crashing into a wall. My feeling is the airplanes came in, hit real hard and probably went down before anybody was able to get out.
The final mystery is what happened to the Mariner rescue plane. There is a rational explanation. Because of their vast fuel tanks, their crews refer to them as flying bombs, extremely vulnerable to electrical sparks or a stray cigarette. The Mariner was tracked on radar until 7:50 p.m., when it disappeared from the screens. At this location, a ship reported seeing a mid-air explosion.
Really, it didn't hit me until 9 o'clock that night, and then I was completely wrung out. But I stayed on duty all that night, all day the next day, and into the next night while they were searching for them. And I felt terrible.
Altogether, 27 young men had died on that night in December 1945. Although the fate of Flight 19 has become clearer, it's not the only mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. So what is it about this area of sea that gives it such a fearsome reputation? The first sailors who braved the Atlantic feared these waters. Legend has it that ships were becalmed here to rot amidst the hulks of earlier vessels. Vast areas of weed on the eastern edge of the Bermuda Triangle made this sea mysterious. It's called the Sargasso. The Sargasso Sea is unusually calm. It's bounded by opposing currents, which make it rotate slowly clockwise, trapping any debris that drifts into it. The weed gave sailors false hope that land was nearby. In fact, the Sargasso is some 700 miles from the east coast of America. Writers have claimed that Columbus was the first to experience strange happenings in the Bermuda Triangle on his voyage to the New World. On September the 15th, 1492, he made a curious entry in his log.
And on this night, they saw a marvelous branch of fire fall from the sky into the sea, distant from them 4 or 5 leagues.
The fire Columbus saw was probably a meteor. Although it posed no threat, there are other natural phenomena in these seas which can strike a ship out of the blue.
U.S. and Canadian ships are searching the Atlantic north of Bermuda this morning for 18 people missing after their ship sank in heavy seas. They were aboard the Marquez.
The sinking of the Marquez in June 1984 was both sudden and mysterious. The loss of her crew of young trainee sailors was particularly tragic. The Marquez was competing in the second leg of the tall ships race from Bermuda to Halifax when she was overwhelmed by an event that entirely missed ships sailing just a couple of miles away. That night, Philip Sefton was at the helm of the Marquez. He was an experienced transatlantic sailor who had braved many storms. But even he could hardly believe what happened.
A wind struck us from over the port quarter of the boat that was astounding in its intensity. It was a straight line blast of wind that had a physical force behind it. and was in excess of 100 knots. It blasted the tops off the waves. It turned the sea itself to milk. It was hard to see where the sea finished and blown spray began. She went down by the bow and you could feel her start to go. But you knew she wasn't coming up again, she was going down. The whole event took 45 seconds from sailing conventionally to the ship going down. And there was no mayday.
As the Marquez sank, Philip Sefton managed to jump clear. After a night in a life raft, he was rescued. 19 of his 28 shipmates had died. A similar storm has been blamed for the crash of a Delta Airlines jet at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport in August 1985. 137 people died.
The plane was scheduled to land at DFW at 5:49 Central Time, but it was a landing the flight would never make. Upon final approach, the plane encountered a sudden severe thunderstorm.
What kind of a wind could cause such devastation to both ships and planes?
5, 4, 3, Atlas engine ignition, 1, 0, and liftoff of the Lockheed Martin International Launch Services Atlas rocket.
At Kennedy Space Center, good weather is essential to the success of rocket and shuttle launches. On the 16th of August 1994, sensors detected a sudden intense gust of wind on the shuttle runway. It reached 65 knots. If the space shuttle had been landing, there could have been a catastrophe.
Range Weather, Sergeant
The U.S. Air Force's 45th Weather Squadron, responsible for support for the space program, decided to investigate.
Current observation?
They suspected a phenomenon called the microburst.
A microburst is a type of very strong, severe thunderstorm downdraft. It's unique in that it's very small, usually less than 2.5 miles, and it's also very short-lived, usually less than 5 minutes.
Beautiful microburst. Winds of maybe up to 100 miles per hour.
Microbursts typically occur during a thunderstorm. A column of cool air descends rapidly towards the ground and spreads outwards. This generates these violent winds. Twice a day, weather balloons are launched from Cape Canaveral Air Station. They carry electronic sensors which send back data on the upper atmosphere. Today, it's possible to assess the risk of a microburst developing. Weathermen can now use radar images of storm cells like these to warn of an imminent threat. Microbursts are a particularly dangerous phenomenon. But how far can weather in general be held responsible for mysterious losses in the Bermuda Triangle? On average, the U.S. Coast Guard's 7th District responds to 22 search and rescue calls and saves 3 lives every day. They know the waters off Miami better than anyone.
You for hire or you guys just recreational right now? For hire, sir. Okay. Can I see your license?
Coast Guard Ken Morton believes that the weather can affect electrical and navigational equipment.
One time during a lightning and thunderstorm, the compass began swinging uncontrollably. It never really did any 360s, but it would swing about 200 degrees in one direction, 200 degrees in the other direction. So it was basically, for all practical purposes, spinning uncontrollably. I attribute that to the lightning that was around us affecting the magnetic poles inside the compass itself.
But the real danger in these waters is the apparent calm, which often lulls sailors into a false sense of security.
Popular belief is the Florida Bay and offshore Florida is relatively calm compared to the rest of the United States waters. But we do, once in a while, get some rough sea conditions, including 10-foot seas and above. The biggest concern to sailors will probably be the summer storms we have, particularly the thunderstorms and the squalls we have, which seem to come up very quickly. Typically, that will reduce the visibility. That, combined with the driving force of the rain, creates an especially hazardous scenario for a boat.
But many writers ignore these storms to keep the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle alive. Consider the case of the cabin cruiser Witchcraft, which disappeared off Miami in December 1967. When the Witchcraft got into difficulties, it radioed the Coast Guard for help. This film presents the story as it is traditionally told.
The two men, knowing their boat was unsinkable due to built-in flotation chambers, had little to do but watch the lights from the vicinity of buoy number 7.
But when the Coast Guard reached the location, they found no trace of the vessel.
Even though the missing boat was last heard of in an area lit by the glow of lights from Miami Beach, she was still in the Devil's Triangle.
The yacht Revenok, owned by publishing millionaire Harvey Conover, vanished in January 1958, apparently also within sight of land.
But nevertheless, it was still 150 miles in the Devil's Triangle.
The reality is that the Revenok disappeared in near hurricane winds. Over 300 men vanished with the USS Cyclops in 1918. It's one of the great mysteries associated with the Bermuda Triangle, but it too could have been affected by bad weather. Going back to original sources, researcher Larry Cush has tried to establish the truth behind these stories.
I found that in virtually every case, the weather had been bad. So you don't need paranormal forces to sink a ship when you've got a hurricane out there blowing 75 miles an hour, and the writers neglect to mention this part of the so-called mystery.
So bad weather could account for most of the supposed mysteries of the Bermuda Triangle. But there is another explanation, that the destructive power of the triangle comes from a source of energy at the bottom of the sea. This strange substance has been recovered from half a kilometer below the sea. It's ice cold, and yet it burns. It is a frozen gas called methane hydrate. Could this material be responsible for downing ships and planes in the Bermuda Triangle? Methane hydrate was first encountered in the 1920s, when it blocked natural gas pipelines. It formed when water and methane gas combined under high pressure and extreme cold. These same conditions are found at the bottom of the world's oceans. 100 miles off the coast of Louisiana, a deep-sea submersible is lowered into the Gulf of Mexico. These waters are deep and cold, and escaping methane gas solidifies into great chunks of hydrate on the bed of the sea.
Here's the big old sucker. Most of the gas hydrate on the planet is buried in sediments, but in the Gulf of Mexico, there's so much in the way of hydrocarbon leakage from oil fields and faults that the hydrate actually grows in contact with seawater.
This environment is full of unsuspected phenomena. This block of hydrate hosts a previously unknown ecosystem fueled by methane rather than energy from the sun. These ice worms are a new species that marine biologists suspect are living off the bacteria that thrive on the methane. But it's what's below the outcrop that is exciting the oil and gas industry. A vast deposit of methane lies beneath the hydrate. Some of the gas escapes through the cracks in the surface. What would happen if this gas was trapped? Roger Sasson was the first scientist to try the experiment.
Okay, we're taking a gas sample now.
As the methane came into contact with the tube, the gas began to crystallize, forming artificial methane hydrate. Dr. Sasson thinks that if these crystals could be harvested, they could supply much of mankind's future energy needs.
This is great. Look at those hydrate crystals, folks.
When the hydrate crystals are melted with warm water, they release enormous amounts of methane. 1 liter of hydrate produces 170 liters of gas.
This is a much larger reserve than the one we've been tapping for the last couple hundred years of the Industrial Revolution. So we have a fuel that's environmentally clean that could last us for centuries.
So how could this potentially beneficial substance threaten ships and planes in the Bermuda Triangle? Dr. Richard McIver, a scientist working in the oil and gas industry, knew that one of the first samples of natural methane hydrate had been recovered within the Bermuda Triangle. In the early 1980s, he came up with a new theory, linking it to the mysterious disappearances there. Underwater earthquakes cause landslides off the continental shelf of Florida. Dr. McIver thought that if a deposit of methane hydrate was disturbed in this way, it could suddenly release a vast amount of gas into the sea. What could this do to a ship? At Texas A&M University, Dr. McIver set up a water tank experiment with a scale model of a tanker. He hoped to show that a catastrophic release of gas could reduce a ship's buoyancy and send it plunging to the bottom of the sea. In the tank, the experiment worked. Dr. McIver now believed the methane gas could even endanger an aircraft flying overhead.
My feeling is that the airplane would experience tremendous turbulence, which could cause the airplane to go down. But more important, perhaps, is that when the gas is diluted 5 to 10 times with air, then it becomes a combustible mixture and could ignite on the exhaust of the airplane.
But McIver's theory has a fatal flaw. Methane hydrate is not confined to the Bermuda Triangle. It is distributed throughout the world's oceans.
If hydrate was dangerous to ships, if it was dangerous to airplanes, there'd be a lot of problems in the Gulf of Mexico. There'd be problems offshore West Africa or Venezuela. So I think it was a good idea, but it does not stand up to the test of reality and data and science.
A bold theory, but not one which reveals anything unique about the Bermuda Triangle. But if gas hydrates are not responsible, what is? It was the press that first suggested that there was a mystery to be solved. On September the 17th, 1950, the Miami Herald published an article by Edward Van Winkle Jones. Jones noted that 135 people had disappeared in the waters off the Miami coast between 1945 and 1950. He told the story of 9 missing planes and 1 boat.
There was nothing in it talking about mysterious forces or anything. It was just the true statement that several airplanes and ships had disappeared off the southeast coast. And then over a number of years, people saw that and added to the story.
Writer and magician Vincent Gaddis was the man who first developed the idea of a Bermuda Triangle. Writing in Argosy magazine in 1964, Gaddis suggested that the mystery was caused by an unknown type of atmospheric aberration. In the 70s, Charles Berlitz popularized the myth of the Bermuda Triangle. His books have sold 18 million copies in 30 languages.
This has been suggested that it's a coincidence that planes and ships should disappear in such numbers, but there's no other section of the world where this happens.
But his assertion that the triangle is unique is not borne out by the facts. Lloyd's of London makes its money insuring shipping and calculating the odds of disaster at sea. Broker Peter Christmas knows which areas present high risk.
Kenny, message. The majority of casualties take place where shipping lanes converge and where they become more crowded. You'll see there'll be a lot of casualties in the Malacca Straits, the approaches to Japan and Korea, the English Channel, the entrance to the Baltic. And I'm far more concerned about vessels trading in those areas than I am about the Bermuda Triangle. We don't consider the Bermuda Triangle to be an area of special risk. We don't charge additional premiums, and statistically we've got no reason to believe it's any more hazardous than any other part of the world.
If the insurance experts are right, there are many areas of the world just as rich in mystery as the Bermuda Triangle. What dark secrets do other waters conceal? Is it possible to create from scratch a myth like that of the Bermuda Triangle? Take an area of sea of a similar size and shape. This triangle in the Atlantic Ocean includes the Canary Islands and the Azores. Give it a mysterious title, like the Casablanca Triangle. What mysteries does it contain?
That's the Mary Celeste, all right.
The Mary Celeste is the ultimate deserted ship mystery. She was discovered in December 1872, drifting between the Azores and Portugal. Although the ship was in good order, there was no sign of the captain, his wife and daughter, or the crew of 8. Many explanations have been made for the Mary Celeste, but no one knows what really happened to her.
No signal. No one at the wheel. Hello! Hello!
The most recent mystery in these waters was the disappearance of millionaire newspaper proprietor Robert Maxwell from his luxury yacht off the Canary Islands. Maxwell was in financial difficulty. So did he jump? Was it a heart attack? Or some more sinister effect of the Casablanca Triangle? Michael Gray is editor of Lloyd's List, the world's oldest daily newspaper. He's searched the records to find ships that have disappeared in this fictional Casablanca Triangle.
We start off here during the Second World War with a general cargo carrier called the Andalusia, which was lost on a voyage from Casablanca to Gothenburg. She went into this triangle and never came out the other side. The phrase is, "not since heard of." There was a vessel called the Homeside. She was laden with iron ore, so you could almost guarantee she was going to sink in a hurry. She left West Africa, bound for the Tees, but she moved into the triangle, and there was never any more trace of her. There's a vessel called the Sam Key, once again, which left London on a voyage to Cuba, down on the southerly Great Circle into the dreaded Casablanca Triangle, and was not since heard of.
And so the list went on. The experiment showed that ships have disappeared without trace in the Casablanca Triangle ever since records began. Even in recent years, a modern bulk carrier didn't survive her passage.
She moved into this triangle on the way to Emden, and there was heavy weather, but she never came out the other side. Now, was that the heavy weather? Was it structural collapse? Or was it, in fact, this triangle that we're hearing about? You could, in fact, take ship losses from our registers here, and you can transpose them into virtually any area in the world, and you can invent a myth to go with it. So it's really not that hard to produce Bermuda Triangles almost anywhere you want in the world.
The most recent mystery of the Bermuda Triangle was the yacht Ruth. In 1997, she'd been found by a Royal Navy frigate drifting and deserted. The mystery deepened when a salvage crew experienced a total loss of power as they brought it back to port. The Ruth is now secured on the British Virgin Island of Tortola. The mysterious power failure has finally been explained. The yacht's electronic systems had been unconventionally wired. Navy engineers found a switch on the alternator that had been turned off. The salvage crew thought they were charging the batteries by running the engines. In fact, they were draining them. And it turns out that the owners of the Ruth had not disappeared into thin air after all. They were Ralph and Britta Schilling, a German couple. In the summer of 1996, they sailed from the Baltic Sea to the Canary Islands. They moored their yacht in a marina there and went ashore to visit some friends.
A few days later, we come back to the harbor, and there was no boat. It was gone. We think someone was stolen the boat, and then they panicked about the police, and maybe they cut the ropes and let them go.
Who set the Ruth adrift remains a mystery. But it's not a mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. Triangle myths are easy to spread, but difficult to expose.
It's very easy to make a mystery. You just make up a few things, you exaggerate a few things, you leave some things out, you make a big deal of anything that's just a little bit odd. People came to believe the Bermuda Triangles because that's all they heard. They never heard that these incidents were explainable. They only heard the mystery side, so when you hear it from 3 or 4 or 5 different people, you think, well, it must be true because all these people are saying it.
What seemed to be a ghost ship turned out to be a stolen yacht, left to drift across the Atlantic Ocean. The cases of Flight 19 and of the Ruth reveal that many mysteries have a very ordinary solution that can be uncovered by painstaking research. And the Bermuda Triangle